is really in these events. And so please post your questions and comments in the chat and engage with one another. We have some fabulous speakers tonight. It's been a pleasure to work with Shatavia, Patrick, and Lance on this program. To begin, we're going to start with Patrick and Lance, who recently went through an extensive hiring process. And they're going to talk about their current responsibilities, the time that they've spent in those positions, and what it was like for them to advance in the hiring process. So why don't we begin with Patrick, if you'd like to talk about your experience, and then we'll hear from Lance, who'll share what it was like for him landing his dream job.
Thanks, Kristina. Yeah, so my name is Patrick Martin. I just recently landed the job with the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I started at the end of January, just under 3 months. Moved down to Montgomery at the end of February. They did let me work remote for a while I was trying to figure out this move. And I'm the education coordinator, so I deal with all of the groups larger than 10 people. It could be school groups, it could be senior citizen, Rhodes Scholars. Today we actually had a choir group from Wales coming to tour. So everybody, right? And I get to deal with all of them. When they try to reserve a trip, that comes to me. I schedule that, greet them when they arrive, give them a tour, follow up post-visit, just that point of contact for the whole thing. And that's a lot of what I was doing at Andrew Jackson's Hermitage before. I was the education manager there, so I dealt with all of the school groups that were coming through. The difference being that was specifically school groups. Now it's everybody coming through on a tour. So I get to interact with a lot more people from a lot of different backgrounds. And what kind of led me to my current role, my degree, like Zinnia said, is in the history of race and religion in America, right? So how religions played a role in race relations, how it can bring about racial reconciliation, racial justice. So I studied Andrew Jackson. Before that, I was actually a formal classroom teacher. I taught in inner city Memphis. I moved abroad and lived and taught in an orphanage in Ghana. So kind of bringing that educational experience into that social justice work, being able to do all of that in a museum setting is really fascinating to me, and that's where I ended up. I found the job on AASLH, so definitely check out those job boards. Those are great resources to find what you're looking for. And I always wanted to work with the Southern Poverty Law Center. That was kind of always a goal of mine. I saw the job, applied, thought I would never in a million years get it, but I did. Through that, just applying, I mean, it was a rigorous process with 5 different job interviews going on all in the same week, and having to decide what was the right fit for me. So ultimately, that's what led me here in Montgomery, Alabama.
Great, thanks for that. And Lance, do you want to talk about how you landed this particular position and what prepared you for this role?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lance Wheeler. I'm serving as the Director of Exhibitions at the National Center for Civil Human Rights. And what led me to this position was my entire museum career, I've been in civil rights museums or working around civil and human rights. I got my first start in Jackson, Mississippi in 2017 at the first state civil rights museum in the country, at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. But I knew it was my time to leave Mississippi. I was there for 3.5 years. And so I began the process of looking for a job, really in the pandemic, right? And so what did that process look like? I interviewed for 5 jobs. Majority of them were ED positions, and I always got to the final round, but they always hit me with, we want somebody local. So I'm like, okay. And so a colleague of mine, Dr. Kalinda Lee, excuse me, who serves as the SEMC council member, sent me the job information for the director of the exhibition position at the center. And so I eventually applied because they're going through an expansion phase. We are going through an expansion phase, excuse me. So we're going to actually add 2 wings onto the building that we have currently. And so I was thinking it from a resume perspective. At 27, I had the opportunity to help open up a first state civil rights museum in the country. At 30, I get to help expand on the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And so if that doesn't get me to the director or CEO position, I'm going to really be upset. But that was my reason for applying. But also I wanted to be closer to my child as well. So it wasn't just all resume, but it was also about life as well. And in my current position as the director of exhibition, it's my job to maintain the physical space of the museum through the galleries, maintenance, also going through this expansion. So we're constantly meeting with the design team, but also we are mandated at the center to display the Martin Luther King exhibition at the Morehouse collection. So it's a huge relationship where Morehouse owns the King collection. The AUC Woodruff Library are the stewards of the collection, and we are mandated to display this twice a year. And so that is my role at the center.
Great, great. Thank you both. You spoke sort of in different ways of getting to something that interests me, and maybe for people who are thinking about a move or how they can highlight their previous experience. Patrick, you mentioned that you had been a public school teacher. So how in your resume did you translate those skills and qualities into a museum setting? And Lance, for you, what did you put on your resume, or what did you bring out that highlighted your leadership experience? So maybe you could each kind of address that. So thinking about skills that you may already have, how they apply to something new, and then highlighting your own leadership skills and applying that to a new position.
Yeah, so for me, all of my positions within the museum field have been in education, and that's where I want to focus, right? So as education manager at the Hermitage, I'm the education coordinator here at the Civil Rights Memorial Center. So being able to take that classroom teaching skill set and just kind of tweak it a little bit, right? And I always say one of the biggest reasons I left formal classroom teaching is because of the limitations on how you can teach that history. Obviously, we're seeing that in the news now, right? Every day in different ways. But being in the classroom, I definitely felt that. So taking that and now being in the museum setting where we do have a lot more freedom on how we can tell the story, that's kind of where I use that skill set, right? I can manage a classroom, I can manage a group. When those kids get off a bus, they're in a single file line and they're silent. I even have teachers come up and they're like, I've not been able to get my class to control this way. And it's because I have that experience, right? And being able to use that in the museum setting, knowing like, we need these students to be on their best behavior. We need them not running around in our exhibits and touching everything, right? Except our museum is now very interactive and touch friendly, and that's really exciting for an education person. I don't have to yell at kids to not touch things as much. But yeah, being able to just take that skill set and transfer it over has been very helpful for me in my roles.
I would say for me, building upon my leadership skill sets, I have to give all the credit to my former director, Pamela DC Jr. at the 2 Mississippi Museums, and her really immersing her staff into taking the lead on projects and taking a step back and saying, you are going to be the next generation of museum professionals. It is my job to train you to either take my job or to leave to take a better job. And so that was from day one. And then also having the privilege of working at a civil rights museum at 27, you know, I'm talking to Mrs. Merle Evers Williams, I'm talking to Bob Moses, John Lewis, and these individuals are telling me, we got here, you are here because of us, and these buildings exist because of us. And so you have no room for failure. So how do you become the best leader? And so taking that torch from them and saying, how do I do this work with pride and honor. It was one of the biggest skill sets that I've learned. I think that helped my leadership, but also tapping into my network, SEMC, AAAM, ASLH, and talking to professionals that have been in the field for a long time, and how do I get there and asking those questions. And so those are how I built on my leadership skills, and just watching and listening.
Okay. No pressure having John Lewis tell you you can't fail.
No, not at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. Keep that light. So you were able to lean on your network. You reached out to people that had more experience than you. You drew upon your mentors. I know that both of you had to develop presentations for your jobs. You had to do 30, was that correct? 30-minute virtual presentations. Did you develop your presentations? Maybe you can tell us about that. And did you share drafts of them with your network for feedback?
I would say it was a daunting task for some of the jobs. For my current position, they tasked me with, hey, come up with an exhibition dealing with elephants. I'm like, okay, how do I find elephants, human rights, and civil rights? And I was able to find a connection, but I honestly called Zinnia. I'm like, Zinnia, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I know what I want to say, but how do I gather my thoughts in this presentation? I lean on Dr. Brenda Tyndall, who's the ED at the Harvard Museums, right? I lean to the people who went through these presentations and in person, but I'm like, how do I adapt this virtually? And so I created all my PowerPoints. I would say Canva was my best friend during the job search.
Okay.
But I did a lot of drafting and sharing with my colleagues and also my peers as well.
Good to know. Good to know. So you drew on your senior members of your network as well as your peers. Patrick, would you like to add to that?
I will say definitely lean on your network. I'm one of those people that when I'm creating something, for me, it's a very private experience. Like it's mine, right? So I don't necessarily share out my drafts or anything while I'm working on it. Like the only thing people are going to see is my final product. So for me, there were areas where I had to, for my current position, we had to do a 30-minute presentation on the civil rights movement. Blank, like what? That's the broadest. That's the broadest presentation category. Now there was some like, you had to do the history of the civil rights movement, and then you also had to do toward the end, you had to pick two of a list of events. So I did the Little Rock Nine and the Montgomery bus boycotts. But the first half of it was just the history of the civil rights movement, as broad as it can be. And they did that intentionally because they want to see what direction you take that in. And thankfully, I mean, like I said, my whole background has been in the history of race in America, right? So I had a lot of that already. They wanted you to make it as close of a personal connection as you could. So you had to also like talk about yourself, do a little brief intro, and then like what role you've taken in like modern activism. So at the end, I talked about the Black Lives Matter marches of 2020 and Black Trans Lives Matter and things like that. A lot of the activities I've taken part in, and I used a lot of personal images. I did have to reach out to some of the people that were in those images, right? Like if I took a group photo with my friends, like, hey, I'm using your picture for a presentation to try to get a job. Like, no, I'm not making money off of it, but I do want to just let you know, like your image is going to be shared.
Sure. So
in those instances, I did kind of share out in what ways I was going to be using them, especially to be completely honest with you, as a white man talking about this line of work where the rest of my group was Black. I didn't want to feel like I was exploiting, right? Like, oh, look at me, look at these pictures of what I've done. So it was how I can use those images, how we can use it properly to try to make a better presentation versus trying to make it about me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as the applicant, it still has to be about you and how you're able to pull that material together, but to do it with sensitivity. I appreciate hearing that. I'm going to pause for a minute and turn things over to Shatavia and Marilyn, since they are on the other side of the hiring desk. And so I'd like to hear from both of you. Shatavia, maybe go first. As somebody who's been hiring people recently and conducting searches, what do you look for in candidates, and what kind of process does your organization have when you're evaluating applicants?
Good evening, everyone. First, I would say that the process entails, for me as a department head or as a hiring manager, is definitely seeking out or recruiting an interview panel. And this would consist of people that would most closely align or work closely with the person that I'm interviewing or that particular position. So finding folks and putting the right people in the room that will definitely help to make a very informed decision. And I think it's important that within our institution that we continue to sort of uphold that model, because we have very, very collective group of folks, and one person is going to work with 12 different departments. So I think that's important on the forefront. Also within our role, I guess in my role as a hiring manager, is just reviewing the applications and cover letters, resumes, all of that information, and sort of getting those things compiled, and then literally coming up with about, I would say, 7 to 10 top applicants out of that pool. And then going over doing like a preliminary interview, just trying to see how people are aligned and if their interests will most closely align to what we are seeking as an institution. And then from there, dwindling down that number down to the top 3. And with that top 3, we will present that top 3 to the panel. And then pretty much at that point, it's an open conversation. Have the candidates have an opportunity to ask as many questions as they want. Just gives us an opportunity to see how this particular person will most closely align to what we are seeking as an institution, and also the goals that we have kind of set forward moving ahead. And then what was the other part of your question? I think it was 2-part. What am I looking for?
Yeah. When you're that sort of fit, if you want to say, so it's, how will this person help your organization achieve its goals? But I think what Patrick and Lance were saying, they were talking a little bit about making sure that their values aligned with the institution. So if you're representing the organization, what do you look for in a candidate to make sure that they're going to have?
I would say the exact same thing. Yeah, I would say the exact same thing, that we're looking for people and that what values they sort of hold as well, and how would they fit in terms of with the culture. I think that's important for both the interviewer and the interviewee to identify what, is this the right place based on your particular values and your culture? Is it something that I align with? Because if it's not, then most likely it will not be a great fit, and you become, candidates can become very frustrated long-term because it's just not aligned to their interests. So I think most importantly for me is to ask those questions to get a little bit deeper in terms of how they see, how does the candidate see themselves here within the institution? Like, what part do they really kind of, like when they saw the application, when they read the application, what part about that really stood out to them as saying, hey, I can make a difference in this particular avenue. And I think that's extremely important for candidates to identify what is it that I can contribute, and not so much as what kind of paycheck can I take from here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good advice. Thank you. And Marilyn, what about for you? You've run a search firm. You've conducted over 100 successful searches. What's that initial impression? What do you look for when you're putting together a pool for a position?
Well, it depends on the position, and I thought I would run through a little bit of some of the process and where you as the applicant, can have a positive effect there. We generally are looking for directors and senior people. So if you're in an entry-level position, you probably wouldn't be working with a search firm, but the same process would be occurring. It's just the museum would be doing it without a firm. And so I think, first, the museum, what are they looking for? The museum is going to develop a job description and a candidate profile that outlines the responsibilities and the qualifications required. And actually later, I think we could talk about how qualifications and requirements are in flux today to ensure that candidates with more diverse backgrounds can get hired. But we can go back to that. But once they've defined that, then they're going to advertise the position. And that's kind of where you come in, because as Patrick said, you should be scouring the AAM job site and AASLH and all the regional and state museum sites and checking the listservs and the websites of the museums where you want to work, and applying for lots of jobs. And so that's your first job. And then we always contact other people in the field for nominations, and often the museum official who's hiring will do that as well. And that's where, again, you can help yourself, and it's something you might not think about, because you have to let's say your director or a past museum director know that you're looking to advance, or as Lance said, that he wants to be a director. Someone needs to know that, or they might not think of you. And or if you're a student, let the head of your academic department know, if you're in graduate school, what kind of job you're looking for. So if they hear of something, they'll think of you. Or you could let the head of your regional museum association, like Zinnia, know that you actually are looking for something in particular, or at a particular organization in that territory, because often either people like Zinnia or people on the board of SEMC and other regional museum organizations are asked for nominations. And if someone has you front of mind, they might nominate you, and that would be a great advantage. Or I always suggest that people volunteer themselves to be on a committee or a board. You've heard some of these people have been active in their professional associations, because that's how you get spotted as an upcoming leader or rising star, so that people will think of you when they go out, to recruit. And then, the next thing is that all those applications have come in, and the hiring person has to sort them out, as Shatavia said, and reduce the number. So, you really want to stand out and make the first cut. And that involves, of course, they're probably going to look at your resume first to see if you're qualified, and then go on, if you are, to your cover letter to see why you are interested and learn more about you. So really, both your resume and your cover letter had better be very strong and fit the job qualifications. As Kristina says, what are they looking for? You better answer what they're looking for if you want to be competitive. And then, as Shatavia said, they're going to kind of make a first cut, and then have some maybe original preliminary interviews, and often will interview 12 or 15 people, which may sound like a lot, but if there are 20 or 50 applications, that's really narrowing it down. And so, you've got to stand out there. And then, we would bring it down maybe to 5 to 8 candidates after we check references, or maybe talk to you further. We usually do a Zoom interview for about an hour. And then, in our case, we'd be presenting a pool to the museum, but then they will cut it down maybe to 4 to 6 people to actually interview by the search committee. So you can see the numbers are going down, and ending up maybe at only, 5, or Shatavia said maybe only 3 people go to the search committee. So there's a lot of competition for the best jobs, and especially, I'd say, entry-level jobs. So, you want to apply, as you've heard, to several jobs. And also, I would say you should look beyond Atlanta or Miami or the big cities in the Southeast, or the big cities in the East and West Coast, where it's very competitive. And, you could look at smaller cities and rural areas, look in the South, in the Midwest, in the Southwest to get your start. Like you heard how Lance went to Mississippi and got a start, and, it wasn't forever, and he decided to leave. But those 3 years, got him that first job that maybe he couldn't get in New York or Boston. So anyway, let me just say a couple of things about interviews briefly. You really have to prepare well for your interviews. Most of them are by Zoom today or similar. First of all, you want to look professional. I mean, you can look at us. Do we all look professional? I think so. You want to look like the role you're applying for. So maybe that's artsy, maybe it's nerdy, maybe you have to be sparkling depending on the job, but you want to look that role. And of course, make sure your lighting and sound are good and test it all out. I once had a very experienced candidate who had a yellow magic marker in her mouth. And, it's like, wait, you don't want to do this. What you want to do is always keep it on the gallery view or whatever it's called. So you can see yourself all the time, even when other people are talking, and you can remind yourself to smile or, see that you're making this funny expression. That's always very helpful. And of course, you have to prepare to answer questions that would be expected. You can imagine a lot of the questions. So I always say, rehearse with your partner or in front of your dog, or, do a preparatory Zoom with your family or a friend, and do research about the museum and prepare 2 or 3 questions that you're going to ask at the end of the interview. You're going to ask them. And we certainly look for people who give apt and crisp answers to questions, but also, who seem enthusiastic and really interested in the job. You want to make it clear that you want the job and you have good reasons for that, and you're open to the location and you would relocate there. But you want to avoid rambling on, as maybe I'm doing now, on any one question. I would never talk more than 5 minutes to answer, a particular question at an interview, because maybe they have 12 or 15 questions for you. And you can always ask, have I answered your question? And, let them say if they want to hear more from you, or go on to the next question. And then, you should send them a nice thank you letter and email afterwards saying you enjoyed the conversation and you're very interested in the job. And I'll stop there, but, we're going to be talking further about many of these things and other things too.
Thank you, Marilyn. 2 things you touched upon that I thought maybe we could move into sort of everyone being involved in the conversation. You talked about preparation and research and being prepared for the questions that you might be asked. So I wanted to just say, what is the one question all of you feel a candidate should be prepared to answer?
Well, look, the first question is probably going to be, either give me a summary of your career, or why are you interested in this job?
And I would say,
say,
tell me about yourself and what interests you about this position.
I would also say, like, how do you see, I guess, something about how are you able to add to our organization? I think that's important. Yeah.
And then also, Marilyn, you had mentioned relocating, and Lance, you relocated, and Patrick, you've relocated internationally a couple of times, sounds like. So when people are looking for a job, and if they're thinking about going outside of a major city, what are some of the things that they might want to take into consideration if they're looking for a job that it would require them to relocate?
For me, and I tell people this all the time. I'm from Jersey originally, lived in North Carolina, and I went to Mississippi. I went to Jackson, Mississippi, and I would do it all over again. But I tell people, you don't have to say yes to the first job if you're coming out of a museum program. That's just my opinion. I think you should be able to equate, okay, do they have a direct flight to that city? Are the infrastructures good? If you're married or have children, is the school system good? I think you should always have a game plan. My game plan is always, by year 2, I'm making a decision if I'm going to stay here long enough or I'm going to leave. But I think you have to know the city, the infrastructure. I personally believe, I'm sure Patrick feels this way, if you are doing the work that we do, that's civil and human rights, you should live in that city where that museum is located. Because the very first thing that community members are going to ask you, where do you live? And so if you tell them you don't live within that city, they're going to look at you differently. And that's really another barrier that you have to try to knock down. And so I'm a big proponent of those things and those considerations before just saying yes or relocating for a job.
Yeah, and obviously people have partners or spouses or aging parents to take care of, and there are a lot of considerations.
I would second what Lance said about where you're living, right? Like you don't want to be living in this neighborhood, but all of your outreach is supposed to be over here. But also just on a larger scale, I mean, being in the field of social justice work, like yes, that happened all over the country, but like there's definitely a lot more of it in the South, right? So where in the country do you want to live? I got offered, I was interviewing for 5 different jobs, and in the same day got offered a job in Vermont and in Montgomery. And it's like, which one made more sense to what I wanted to focus on, right? Also, I was in Nashville. Montgomery is 4.5 hours away. Vermont is not. So also about family, right? Where's your family? But another big thing, and I think ultimately this was the final straw that made me decide on Montgomery, was relocation assistance. And that's okay to be a deciding factor, right? And it's okay to ask about in the interview. The job in Vermont was going to reimburse me up to $3,000. The job in Montgomery gave me $6,500, no questions asked. Like, that's a big deciding factor, and that's okay if that's in your decision process. It doesn't need to be the only thing, right? You need to want to be there, but that definitely plays a role. You need to be able to move comfortably. You need to be able to have that moving forward. Can you afford a move to this side of the country where this other job is offering you that assistance?
And I want to follow up behind that. It was the opposite for me. I got offered the chief curator position at the Birmingham Institute, right? And I got offered the job here in Atlanta. And Atlanta would not pay for my relocation, but Birmingham would. And so I use my leverage and say, well, Atlanta, if you want me to come, I'm going to work remote for the first month, and then I will come. And so they were able to say, we will do that. And so I ultimately came to Atlanta, also because of proximity to my family as well. But I want to say in that situation, you can always use your leverage if they really want you as well.
I'm also sort of curious too, on the other side, since many of you are in museums with social justice and civil rights focus, Shatavia, in the wake of 2020, how has your organization changed their hiring practices? And Marilyn, what are you seeing in your work with other institutions?
Well, one of the main things is that we're not, I guess the demographics of the candidates are not revealed to us. And so everything is pretty much a blind process up until the point where we get in front of the camera and we say, hello, welcome, welcome to an interview. So I think that has been definitely beneficial in terms of, for me, because I didn't work with the institution much longer before the pandemic sort of hit. So from what I can see now, from my vantage point, that has definitely been instrumental in making sure that we are being equitable in our decision-making and just trying to do things the right way.
Yeah, I would add that there's been a welcome change, that a lot of very qualified people, whether they're Asian, African-American, Latino, who had been passed over for decades, are suddenly being taken seriously and actually hired, which is a welcome and overdue thing. And I know, at our firm, we've really made an effort to educate ourselves with various, readings, webinars, talking to people to make sure that we're being more sensitive and being more open. I mentioned about changing qualifications. People have gone, I hope, from saying, oh, you had to have a degree at an expensive private college, because those were, quote, the best people, or where I went to school, to, looking at people who came up through community college, state university, but maybe they ended up at Stanford and got a PhD because, they didn't have the same money at the beginning when they're brilliant. So I think people are more open to different paths to senior jobs. I think we always try to present a diverse field now. And I think on the one hand, it'd be hard to present things blind because people want the diverse candidates. And it's an advantage maybe, to be diverse now. So I don't know about, we don't do it blind. But I know, I've heard that of other places at universities and so on. But yeah, there's been a big change, and I think for the better.
Thanks, Marilyn. And I know what you're saying too about people kind of want to know. I think it's very hard in this day and age to maybe prevent search members from doing their own research. Members of search committee, once they know the name of a candidate, it's very easy for them to do their own searches. And I'm sure you've encountered that. And perhaps our panelists could address social media, their own, or what they look at, or Marilyn, what you would recommend for people who are applying, how they might think about their own social media profiles. Did anyone take pains to scrub their social media profile or burnish their social media profile?
Well, if no one's, maybe their profiles are perfect, but I will just say that everybody looks now, maybe first at LinkedIn and then, at your Facebook page or whatever you have, Twitter, Instagram. So, if you're standing there with cans of beer, it's not as good. Anyway, all your political leanings and all kinds of things may be out there, and they may not coincide with the Board of Trustees' views, or anyway, everyone looks at it. You got to scrub it.
Okay.
I intentional. Well, I'm not on my social media with beers in my hands, but I'm definitely aware of what I post. But I also make sure all my Facebook and Instagram, you have to request it. I have to approve your requests.
Okay.
So. But LinkedIn, it's always up to date on what I've done. So that is my more professional page than anything. But I will recommend, if you do have those things on your social media, if your settings are not private, clean it up. But if you don't want to, then make your page private, and be intentional what you do post, because that is the name of this game. People are going to look you up. And ask other questions then.
I think my take is a little bit, is maybe along the same lines as that also, but I just really I would hope that people would strive to be a person of integrity. So the person that you are in private should be the same person that you are in public. And so if that is the case, then your social media should never be a problem.
Thanks for that reminder. I think integrity is so important for people when they're applying for a position, to make sure that they're accurately recording their skills, but also really exemplifying the values that they live by when they're applying for a position. I'm going to start taking some of the questions that are appearing in the Q&A. So if you're listening and you have some specific questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will be sure to get to them. So I'm going to turn this over again to any of the panelists to respond to. Somebody is looking for tips on how to respond to an offer if you're still waiting to hear back from another institution.
Well, I say you play the game. That's what I did. I told the Civil Rights Museum here in Atlanta, hey, I need an answer soon because I got an offer from Birmingham and this is what they're going to give me. What could we do in this situation? If they sped up their process and they made a better offer, and so I'm here in Atlanta, I think you can definitely say, hey, I've been offered this. Is there a quicker response? What can we negotiate here? It's all about leverage. It's how you do it.
And from the hiring manager side, I would definitely say the same thing. We would love to hear that you have another offer pending, or whatever that looks like. And it just, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes in terms of our timeline. But if there are opportunities where the process can be sped up, we will most certainly do it if you are the right candidate. If not, then we will wish you well.
Yeah,
And it saves you time.
I would agree. You want to use your leverage and you want to negotiate, but you also have to do what's best for you, right? If one site is saying like, this is our time frame, and we would love if you continue on, but unfortunately, like this is that time frame. You've got to make the right decision. That happened with me. Shatavia, I was interviewing with her, and it didn't line up. And as much as I was definitely considering that position, I needed to take what was right there. And I couldn't, that wasn't a time when I could roll the dice. If you're able to roll the dice and you want to, then great, wait it out. But you need to weigh all your options, and you need to do what's right for you.
Yeah. Although I often tell people to take the bird in hand. If, they have to give an answer to one, and they know, even if you're a finalist in another job, you might have a 50% chance or a 33% chance if there's 3 finalists. So I remind people that. So maybe you should just take the other job. But, there are a lot of factors, as you hear.
Okay, and here's another question. This person worked in museums during college up until 2021. They're now in a non-museum role in higher ed. They're finishing with a degree. They volunteer at a local museum. Any tips for how to leverage non-museum work when they want to perhaps re-enter the museum world?
I can take that one.
Okay.
I started out as a director of education at the Atlanta History Center with no museum experience. All of my education background, everything was in education, the field of education. I was, curriculum and instruction. That was my skill set. And so what I was able to do is I utilize the talents and the skills that I had. And I was able to show the hiring manager at that time some of the gaps that they were having in their programming, and how my skill set could then leverage their program. And so based upon that then opened up an opportunity for them to say, oh, this is something that we need to work on. And so as a result of that, it really just shifted the culture. It shifted their expectations, and it shifted the department as a whole. It shifted the institution. So yeah.
Can I just follow up with you? How did you identify the gaps in their program? Or was it just something, what did you do to identify those?
Well, in my field of education, I've been in the museum space before. I brought students there before. Also being, around history, I know some of the things in terms of how education works for students, some of the common trends, some of the, I guess, the pedagogy. I knew what it takes to really educate students in some of those gaps that we were experiencing on the forefront within schools. Okay. So within that, I was able to identify, based on the resources that the History Center had, where they didn't necessarily line up. And so that was what I showed them. And that went, obviously it helped at some point.
Yeah, I think doing that sort of research, or at least visiting the institution if you have the opportunity, and maybe doing a little reconnaissance is useful.
Yes. So I would definitely say for that particular person that asked the question, just really, don't try to be something that you're not. You can only present yourself as is, and just really, truly figure out what you are good at, what's your niche, what's your thing, what's your peanut butter and jelly, and then take that to the forefront and present it. And if they want it, they do. And if they don't, it's not your place.
Okay.
But be confident in what you bring to the table.
Okay. Here's something else that I think requires a lot of confidence: to know your self-worth, to know what you bring to the position. Salaries. How do you negotiate salaries? What do you say if you get asked what your salary requirements are? How do you all address this? Because I think it's one of the toughest questions, and people are expecting it, but it's easy to be thrown off.
Yeah, that's a very field that's in very big change right now, because in the last few years, people are posting salary ranges, and it's become much more transparent. And I won't go into all the reasons of bad salaries and unhappiness and unions and on, but there's a lot of change going on. So often you will see the range posted. For example, at AASLH, you cannot post without a salary range now. So that still doesn't mean you're going to get the top salary. You know, if you have a PhD and 30 years experience, maybe you're going to be at the top of the range, but otherwise, you know, you may not be. But I will say there are a lot of articles and readings about how to negotiate a better salary. In fact, in the New York Times business section just this past Sunday, there was a whole article about don't leave money on the table. A lot of people, you know, they get an offer and they accept it, especially women. And you don't have to do that. If the salary range is higher, you know they have a little bit of leeway. And if they can't give it to you in the salary, maybe they can give it to you in the relocation or a sign-on bonus or enhanced retirement or healthcare or something else that's valuable. So yeah, I would read up on negotiations and be prepared to do that.
I would do a national search on the position that you want and compare that salary range. And then I'm also then looking in the state, what's across the board as well. And then I apply what my mama always tells me, go $5,000 more than what you want. And then you probably fall where you want to land. So those are my approaches. And if I can't get the salary that I want, I'm going to negotiate. Well, can you provide me a coach for a year for this position? Or will you be able to pay for my museum membership and pay for my conference? So it's other ways for you to find wiggle room if they can't give you the salary that you ultimately want.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question. How do you think museum hiring boards weigh candidates that are local and already have connections to the place versus non-local applicants?
That feels like a Lance question.
Yeah. So I think it's costs, right? I can relocate this person, or I can get this candidate who's local, who's ready in this network of people. Like I said earlier, that's happened to me a few times looking for these jobs, being a finalist. So I think the local is always going to win unless you blow them out of their socks.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we try to educate boards and people that are hiring that the person doesn't have to be local. They're going to make contacts very quickly, and that museum professionals move from one city, one part of the country to another, and that the institutions are similar enough that they're going to be able to jump right in and hit the ground running. Because often they start out looking for local, and they hear from a few people, maybe that doesn't matter so much, or people can be successful. And relocation is a one-time cost, so it really should be a factor in hiring the best person. But
along the same lines, so if you are somebody who's interested in moving, or maybe you're in a rural area, do you have any advice for applicants to really communicate that they're willing to relocate, that they're coming from a smaller area, a smaller city or a rural area, and they really are looking to relocate, so that they can perhaps eliminate that edge that perhaps a local candidate might have?
I would say put it in the cover letter, right? Like, acknowledge the fact that, yeah, you're not local, right? But why do you want to move to this new city? Why are you looking to get out of wherever you are? And I was very transparent about that. Coming from Nashville, I was like, look, Nashville's not it for me, right? Like, Nashville is growing a lot faster than I am, and like, I'm good. Like, I'm gonna move on. And maybe that's why Atlanta didn't work. But just being transparent about that, right? Why are you looking to relocate? And don't sit there and degrade your job. That's not what they're looking for. But what about your job profession, your characteristic is making you want to relocate, because there's going to be a reason. Obviously, our field in general just does that. That's what we do. But why are you personally looking to do that?
Yeah, and I think, people look in those cover letters for a reason. If you have a family nearby, or even a cousin, happens to live nearby, or you've been there before, or whatever it is, the more you say, they're looking for some reason, because people have a longer tenure if they, do have maybe a family there, or it's where they want to be. I will say one thing that might surprise you is that the number one reason that we can either relocate people or we cannot relocate them, they can't move, is they're taking care of elderly parents. So if that's part of your situation, the sandwich generation here, taking care of kids and parents, you could say that because it's just incredibly common. And that's one reason sometimes you can move someone. Like I moved someone from California to Boston because her elderly parents were in Connecticut and she was tired of flying, 3,000 miles all the time, every time they got sick. So it, can be a reason why they want to hire you. You want to move because of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
I just have a quick follow-up question. So, because I always advise that the cover letter is very important. Shatavia and Marilyn, did you look? Is it still important?
It is. It is. It just gives a more thorough outlook into the candidate and what their interests are and where they're trying to sort of go.
Yeah, and you could tell a form letter from one that's written for your job, which should be for your job.
Mhm.
Well, Zinnia, we are at 7. I know that we could continue this conversation, and I still have more questions, and I think there's some in the chat that we just haven't been able to get to. But in the interest of time, I think we should end, and just wish everyone who's looking for a job good luck with their searches. Draw on your network. I'm certainly available. I've conducted 2 resume reviews and had an amazing experience. So if you want to ask a question or a sounding board, you can find me. I'd be happy to speak with you. So thank you, everyone.
I just want to say too, this was been one of my favorite programs and panels and partnerships to work with. For those of you, we were keeping track of all of the questions that were in the chat. Let us put our heads together to think about what we can do with those and how we can actually get them addressed, so that we can still give you the answer. So stay tuned. This recording will be available by the end of the week. I started it a little bit late, but that just means you don't have to hear me talk for 5 minutes if you go back and watch it. Shatavia, Marilyn, Patrick, Lance, all of you guys, thank you so much. And Kristina for wonderful moderating, and Alex for helping pull all this together. This was really a great hour to spend with all of you. So,
And I just want to say, I put my contact in the chat if anyone wants to follow up in conversation.
I did as well.
I'll throw mine in there.
good.
I think also just one last thing is in addition to knowing when to land the job, it's also very important to know when it's time to go.
Yes.
Lance brought that up.
That'll be our next one. I think we need to
Yes.
takeoffs. We'll do one on
Takeoff, yes, I love it. We're gonna go far with this theme.
We will. It's going to be great. So
Can I do
I was going to say, you're all agreeing. We're going to bring you back in 6 months. We're going to be a takeoff.
can I do a shameless plug real quick?
Sure.
Okay, so there was a question, how do you build your leadership? I'm going to say SCMC offers Leaderships Institute for you can do that. We have Jimmy, which is the Jekyll Island Management Institute. Also, AASLH also offers a leadership as well. So look at your museum organizations that offer those resources. They can help you fill those gaps. Jobs would like to say, well, you don't need that much paper. You really do. People are going to look at what you have done and build upon. So look at SCMC. I'm a council member, so I'm going to do my shameless plug, but look at us, please. And we do offer those management and leadership skills. So thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Gold star. All right. Thank you, everybody. Go on with your evening, and we will see you on the next program. So have a good night.
Bye, Zinnia. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.